When I was in Sweden, around the town that my friends lived in, Asians was like, again, a minority as well. So I don't know if I should be telling this story, but then I forgot my ID. So they actually managed to borrow an ID from their Asian classmate for me to go into the club. And then the bouncer came up to me after I entered the club. Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Lydia Choi-Johansson, a researcher who looks into people's life at home for Swedish-Dutch conglomerate Ikea, a South Korean native who grew up between the US, China, and South Korea before settling in Sweden. Lydia talks to us about her studies of everyday lives of ordinary households and how multiculturalism plays a key part in global business strategy. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, this week, I'm so glad to be bringing in a guest all the way from Sweden to join us for a very interesting discussion ahead. So, welcome to Proudly Asian, Lydia. How are you?
Hi, Isabel. All good here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Lydia. I've been so excited about this conversation that we're about to have because we came across a magazine interview of yours a little while ago that touches on the work that you do as a researcher for IKEA. And what you essentially research is a very important part of everyone's lives, is essentially people's life at home and how that will inform product and market strategies, and which also feeds into the broader discussion about how multiculturalism influences international business. So I'm definitely very, very curious about what you have to share with us later on. But before we talk about the work that you do specifically, I would like to know a little bit more about your personal story, your background. So why don't we start with this question that I ask every single guest of mine on Proudly Asian, which is, tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up?
Right. Yeah. So my name is Lydia. I'm originally from South Korea. And as far as I know, my parents made me in South Korea, and I was born in South Korea. And I grew up until 6 in South Korea, and my family moved to U.S., California, Orange County, and we lived there for 3 to 4 years. And then I moved back to Korea. So there's been a lot of bit of back and forth in my life. And then I graduated middle school. And when I turned 15, I moved to China. And I moved alone because I wanted to live kind of by myself and go to high school in China. So I lived in Tianjin for a year. And then I came back to Korea, finished my high school, started undergraduate studies in Korea. And then I moved to Sweden as an exchange student, and then went back again. So, yes, and then went back to Sweden to do my master's and my PhD. And from then on, I started, I just settled down in Sweden.
Wow.
Yeah, a bit of a back and forth. But I live in a place called Edinburgh, southern part of Sweden, in a very nice, peaceful town, small village. And it's snowing a lot right now. It's so beautiful. So, and I live in a really nice, cute house with 3 kids, 3 small kids and a dog. So yeah, that's me.
I hope you're coping fine with the long winter. You moved quite a bit back and forth, and ultimately you settled in Sweden. What prompted you to stay in Sweden? Was it because of your research purely, or was there some other reasons?
I think I need to start from the beginning, how I came to Sweden as an exchange student. When I wanted to go abroad during my undergrad, I really wanted to go somewhere different. And my first choice was actually Spain. But in that particular semester, my university didn't have a partnership with any Spanish university. And then I thought, yeah, Sweden, why not? So I had really zero knowledge about this country when I first came here. But as soon as I came here, it was really different. And a lot of the values that really resonated well with me. So that's one of the biggest reasons that I decided that, yeah, this is a country where I really want to live for a longer period of time.
You know, like when you first started living in Sweden, right? Was the lifestyle something that's unfamiliar to you? Was it very different? Did you have to spend some time to adapt to that lifestyle? What really stood out about the Swedish lifestyle to you when you first moved there?
Yeah, exactly. It was not very easy to adapt to Sweden, to be honest. First of all, the cold. It was very cold, and the coldness was fine, but it's the darkness that really gets into you. I think coming from Korea, Seoul, life is very competitive, and Swedes are very relaxed. They're not very competitive. They're so chilled out. And that was kind of like shocking. Why is it, I'm so used to kind of high tempo, but very low tempo, very chilled out. And I think that really stood out for me. And that was also something that I really wanted to learn more about it. Like, how could people be so happy and relaxed like this?
I also want to talk a little bit about the work cultures in Sweden, right? And obviously, you have lived in so many cities. I'm just wondering if you have spotted any major difference between work cultures across these cities that you lived in.
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference is that it's really family oriented. So as I said, it's really relaxed. People are really relaxed and really respect that people with family, especially like myself having 3 kids. It's really tough when they get sick all the time. And, I have to call in sick for the kids and then, have to work from home. Even before COVID, working from home because of sick children was very much understandable, and everybody respected that. And that's the kind of culture that I think really is different compared to, yes, Seoul or US. So we're in a lot of very competitive culture as well. And in Sweden, in July, everybody takes 4 weeks of vacation. It's just July is a month that nobody works. And when I talk to my friends in Korea or in the US, they get very surprised. Like, what do you mean? Like 4 weeks? How is that possible? And then it's even better for people with kids because then people usually take 6 weeks off. So summer, I also take 6 weeks off, and you get used to it.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago I worked for an Italian company, and it was kind of like a tradition for them to take summer holidays off the entire August as well. So it was actually nice to be working in an Italian company or like European companies that actually value the work-life balance of their employees, the family lives. But I mean, just a fun question here. Does working overtime ever exist in Sweden?
Well, it does, but in a different way. So, for example, like I could give you an example. So, like today, I took the kids to daycare and school at 7. So they start at 7, and then my work started at 7:30, and then I will finish work around 4 o'clock to pick up the kids. So the day is very short. So sometimes after putting the kids to bed, then I will pick up some work, do some emails. So it's also very flexible. So I wouldn't say there's no overwork, but it's on your pace. So which makes a lot difference.
I mean, the other aspect about meeting a person like yourself who have lived in so many cities, right? I'm also curious about the racial dynamics in the places that you've lived in. For example, in Sweden, what's the racial dynamics like, and how does that compare to the other cities like the US, China, and South Korea, all these markets that you have lived in?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very diverse country, and the place that I live is also the diversity is very much well embraced. However, the difference is that I feel like also when it comes to racism, if you ask the question, is there racism in Sweden? I would say yes, but then it also depends on who you ask. If you ask a Swede, born and raised in Sweden and have no experience living abroad, they will say, no, there is no racism in Sweden. So it's really depending on your background and your understanding of racism and also diversity. So because I think the racism that Swedes are more used to, what they think of is more this explicit violence. But then the racism that I experience in my everyday life is much more subtle. So that's also quite different from if I compare to my living experience when I was living in US. That was during 1991, 1994, when there was in LA this kind of really big tension between the Korean community and then African American community. So racism was actually fear. It was in my kind of daily life fearing that I might be attacked or I might need to worry about my own safety. Whereas in Sweden, that's not really the case. It's more in the kind of everyday languages or this kind of lack of understanding and indifference that people don't really know about, being Korean. And then they will kind of always ask me like, yeah, are you from China directly? Just by, just looking at me. And things like, I think I also heard a lot from your podcast, but like about, yeah, you speak really good English and things like that. But I think it's also kind of interesting when it comes to people complimenting my English. Sometimes it is really a compliment, like a genuine compliment, because also like Swedes, they are very proud of speaking good English among Europeans. So from that perspective, like, yeah, that's really a compliment. But sometimes also, it can be really a compliment, but it's also sometimes a condescending tone, like with kind of assumption, oh, I did not expect you with your racial background to speak so good English. Mm-hmm. So you need to also kind of distinguish. Sometimes it's really a genuine compliment and sometimes it's not. So it's also kind of, yeah, it depends on the situation.
Just a very quick question, right? Are Asians visible in the place that you live in currently in Sweden, or are they visible in Swedish workplaces at all? Or like, do you often find yourself being the only Asian around?
I would say I'm not the only Asian, but it is definitely a minority, for sure. And then there's many Chinese community, and then also a lot of Thai people who have moved from Thai and Vietnamese who have moved to Sweden. But I would say Koreans are really a minority.
I see. When you mentioned how Swedish people would be proud of being able to speak great English, because actually my best friends, by the way, I'm saying hello to them. I know they listen to the show. Hello. I remember visiting them in their hometown, and then one of their aunties came up to me speaking English to me, and then the auntie essentially just said to me like, oh, like if it wasn't for myself to be drunk, I wouldn't speak English to you. So in a way she was implying like she would only speak English to me when she's drunk, and she was very proud of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and another funny incident when I was in Sweden was that around the town that my friends lived in, Asians was like, again, a minority as well. So I don't know if I should be telling this story, but then I forgot my ID. So they actually managed to borrow an ID from their Asian classmate for me to go into the club. And then the bouncer came up to me after I entered the club saying that, I know you're not the owner of the ID, and then they just gave you an Asian ID, but I hope you have fun tonight.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yes, that happened. Yeah. So,
well, you had fun.
Yeah, I have only fond memories about Sweden. But now moving on to the conversation, I would like to get more of your expert insights into how multiculturalism influences behaviors and business strategy. Because now that I know you work as a researcher who looks into people's life at home, and one might think this is a rather niche area to look into, but essentially it is of great importance because what you're looking into is essentially this layer of everybody's lives that is so essential, so important that it almost became invisible to many people. And if I understand it correctly, it's kind of about how people interact with their spaces and environment and how their behaviors would influence their purchase decisions and how businesses would conduct their strategies, right? So you did a research back then on the dynamics that may occur when global brands like Ikea enter the Korean market or like having some localization strategy. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the key findings from that research of yours?
I did. I started my research, PhD research, 2012, and IKEA first entered South Korean market or established the first store 2014. So I was lucky enough to follow that process for 2 years. In the marketing team, how do they really understand South Korean market? And I was able to also follow the media and the consumers as well. And then the research question was, how do global brands enter a new market? That was a very simple question. And there were already debates in the academic field about globalization as such. And then there's one school of thought from more the economist view that, globalization is about homogenizing the world. Like you read stories about McDonald's and Coca-Cola making everybody look not look similar, but having a similar culture as such. So that's the more kind of the economic view of gaining this economic and efficiency, relentlessly modernizing the kind of the world. There's one school of thought. And then there was another school of thought when I was doing research, that it's the more kind of anthropology, kind of resisting this kind of homogenization, that globalization is actually helping people to, celebrate their locality. So those two big school of thoughts was the kind of the main discourse when I was doing my research. And I really wanted to capture the dynamics and the more nuances in these two debates. And my study was actually showing that globalization and global brands are kind of giving people some kind of framework or a structure to express their locality. So it's not about being good or bad, because that was the dominant discourse. Is it good or is it bad? But what I've found in my study is that people were consuming the Scandinavian aesthetics and using IKEA brand to really have a coping strategy in the Korean competitive culture. So again, it's not about being good or bad. Global brands are useful. So, and being Korean and not knowing Koreans, Korean love useful things, and Koreans are very pragmatic, and pragmatic things are successful. So IKEA became very successful in Korea. And now, more or less 10 years has passed since I started my research. And when I go back to Korea and I see Korean homes, it's not like it looks like Sweden. It's not like every home is a Swedish home. It is nothing close to that. So again, it helps us to understand that globalization and global kind of taste as such is not really homogenizing, but it is helping people, if you use it in the right way, to express identity.
I love how the kind of work that you do, it's also sort of highlighting the notion that for global corporations looking to enter local markets, sometimes a top-down approach, it no longer works. And I think previously you also mentioned how, like, for international expansion, it cannot just be seen as purely expansion, but it's sort of like there's this chemical reaction between the brand identity of these global corporations and how they mingle and work with the local cultures as well. So it's so interesting, the whole chemical reaction between the two elements. So obviously, with the research that you did and your work experience with IKEA, could you help us understand why it's so important to hire diverse talents for brands with a global footprint?
It's so important. I mean, I could only speak for working at IKEA. I mean, it's a global company trying to really help the many people live a better everyday life, and to understand what is better everyday life is so different. Hence, you need different background of people to really be relevant. It's also easy and it's not wrong, but it's so easy to feel comfortable and think in the same way that you are used to. But, life is so different. The creating meanings are different, and various people with different backgrounds, when people come together, that's when you really try to understand what's the essence, what's the difference, but also what is the commonality. So that really helps a lot. And in my workplace, there's we have so many different backgrounds in the team.
Definitely, and having such diverse set of talents also really become very important when a company is trying to conduct international strategy or like putting out campaigns that are culturally relevant to a certain group of audience, right? I think one of the bad examples I could think of was this UK newspaper. During Lunar New Year, they did this editorial photo shoot where they essentially put joss papers into the set. And I think joss papers is something that would be used during the ghost month or like funerals in Chinese
Oh
culture.
no.
So that was a huge mistake. And if they had someone on the team who had understanding about the Chinese culture or who himself or herself was Chinese, I think they would never make such mistake.
That's also what I tell like the
Yeah.
collections team at IKEA. Like, hey, like for Chinese New Year collection, everything does not need to be red. And if you're gonna do red, it needs to be the right red tone.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned a little bit about globalization earlier, but I just want to understand, how does globalization, let's say the transfer of information and content, with social media these days, right? And also back then, globalization would take the form of increased movement of people. So, how does globalization influence consumer behaviors, decisions, and also the subsequent product decisions made by global brands such as IKEA?
Yes, globalization, I think it is influencing, again, coming back to the research that I did, globalization is becoming more useful as a tool for people to make sense of their everyday life. I think that's the kind of what I strongly see as well. And I see definitely for the younger generation, they make use of globalization, such as information, for their benefits. So I think it's definitely influencing people in a positive way. When it comes to making decision, again, people are with the information that is becoming more available, people are gaining more knowledge about, let's say, like how transparent a company is and also about what they do and as such. So I think it is it has great impact with both pros and cons, of course.
Could you help us understand, during your time working as a researcher, did you spot any stark differences between, the living needs and purchase decisions of people who live in a metropolis versus those who live in more of like a countryside or suburbs environment? Do they have a lot of differences in terms of the choices that they make for their homes?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I could say that there's a lot of commonalities living in the cities. So whether you live in New York, Shanghai, or Stockholm, living in the city is the lifestyle is quite similar. And what we see is that people are living more in smaller spaces. So space is a great constraint living in big cities. So their needs are also very similar. So people want to have more multi-purpose furniture, multi-purpose items that will make their life easier and have different activities going on with easy transition. Whereas if you live in the suburbs or the countryside, you have kind of enough space to kind of out into different parts of your house. So it's much more about less about multi-purpose, but a kind of single-purpose kind of furniture and spaces that you see. However, there is also a commonality between the urban and rural. It's interesting because no matter where you live, everybody, their number one struggle is about having more space. And interestingly enough, like in US, space per person is the biggest. It has the largest space compared to any other countries. However, they have the most struggle when it comes to having more space. People want to have more space. It doesn't matter where you live, it's the suburb or small space living in the city. Yeah, everybody is struggling with their stuff, wanting to have more space.
I guess when it comes to more space, one cannot complain about having too much space, right?
No,
But
exactly.
a follow-up question on that is, when it comes to aesthetics, because for example, where I live currently, Hong Kong, which is the most expensive housing market there is, people actually think having a flat or having a space that looks exactly the same as one of those model home displays at IKEA would be considered as a luxury, a dream home. Does this perception also apply to any other markets that you've looked into?
Yeah. A lot of markets where IKEA is entering, the kind of new markets, we see that a lot. I think IKEA as a brand in Sweden is it's an old brand, and then that concept of and then that aesthetics is also quite yeah, it's been around for a long time, let's say it like that. And there's a lot of other brands doing that. So I think it kind of lost that kind of freshness. But a lot of new markets, like as you mentioned, Hong Kong, Seoul, let's say a lot of Southeast Asian countries that IKEA are entering, the concept and that kind of aesthetic is really well received and very popular, as you say.
I see. And do Swedish people also embrace that style just as much as the new markets that you mentioned, or do they tend to want to experiment or create their own identities through their choices of furniture? Do you see more of that individualistic behavior among Swedish people?
Yeah, exactly. I think there is definitely this kind of like Scandinavian chic minimalism that is very popular, but I think at the same time, people do want to have their more individual kind of take and individual expression rather than trying to furnish everything with IKEA, I would say.
I see. And I know that you are driving the efforts of IKEA's Live at Home research. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the initiative and the interesting findings throughout the years?
When it comes to understanding life at home, everything that we do as a business needs to start with the right insights to understand life at home and people's dreams and desires and also challenges in the home. It's really an important factor when doing business at IKEA. So anything we do, we need to start with a really accurate, deep understanding of people. So I feel quite excited about that. And one of the things that we really kind of came to an understanding was then due to COVID, people's relationship with space and homes have really changed. Now people are seeking more comfort, spending more time at home, and understanding how home is an important space for people's well-being. I think that is one of the biggest findings that we have today.
That's very interesting. And I'm just wondering for the research that you do, we know that IKEA serves different crowds and audiences on the various needs across the globe. And we mentioned a little bit about brand perception and how that might differ in Europe, Asia, and North America. Do you see maybe the difference in terms of brand perceptions could be driven by how people want to or don't want to associate or express their cultural identities with IKEA pieces? Do you see the values of Asian values and Western values are initiating different reactions across different groups of consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, like in Sweden, if you say, "Ah, my home is all furnished by IKEA," it's not something to be proud about or something to brag about. But then there is definitely like in markets like Sweden and Germany, the brand is very old, but it's also a nostalgic brand and a trusted brand. So people do love and trust the brand, but then it's not really a exciting brand as such, I would say. So that's the case in Sweden. And for the young like kind of students, I think it's they're also looking for kind of like what's new, what new brands could they really find. And then I think for North America, IKEA it's a foreign brand. I would say the concept is still very foreign. Like assembling your furniture as such is not really well received or understood for the North Americans, I would say. So it's it's a positive brand, but a quirky brand, I would say, a bit strange. and then, and then in Asia and like in South Korea, China and a lot of Southeast Asian countries, I think IKEA is still such a new brand. Although in China, it's been around for quite some time. For a majority of people, it is a very kind of new brand in a sense that it has smart solution. The design has this strong design identity. So it's a very loved brand, I would say.
I don't know about whether or not they apply the same social media strategy in China, but then I know definitely the social media efforts are very well loved in the Hong Kong market and Taiwanese markets because, like, I think they tend to do this very localized approach, and they tend to push out posts or visuals that would be relevant to some current affairs, which I find very, very interesting. And I mean, like you mentioned just now, how people perceive IKEA across different markets, and essentially it's based on different needs as well. And I could probably imagine maybe IKEA could do a lot better in college towns in the US where, there are students who just need nice furniture with a budget. Yeah, so that will come in handy. And I guess definitely it's quite interesting to see how Asian values and Western values and how that influences brand perception, because in Asia, collectivism is an important value practiced by many Asian cultures and societies. And to the point that like you mentioned earlier, McDonald's, right? McDonald's had to respect that in order to have a successful international expansion into China back in 1990. So it's so interesting to see like collectivism might also mean consumers might want to have what others have, or they might want to have more of that shared experience of maybe having the same type of style, aesthetics, as opposed to maybe European consumers might want to be a little bit more individualistic in the sense of the purchase decisions that they make. But here's a fun question for you, Lydia. I'm just wondering if you own any IKEA furniture pieces and which one is your favorite?
Yeah. I would say right now I have like 95% of the home is furnished by IKEA. It's, because I work at IKEA. We live very close to the IKEA store, out of all convenience. But I wish I wish I had more kind of traditional Korean furniture. It's just, practically difficult to get it all the way to Sweden. But anyway, but my favorite IKEA furniture is actually the baby chair called Antelope. So it's a toddler baby chair for kids. It's very affordable. It's very practical. It's very robust. It survived 3 kids. So that's my ultimate favorite.
Wow.
And it looks very nice as well.
Wow, I'm definitely gonna check it out afterwards to see what it looks like. But now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Fires. And in this segment, I'll be asking my guests biased questions they've got asked at some point in life. So, Lydia, are you ready?
Yeah, bring it on.
Great. Let's start with the first question. You must be pretty good at maths, right?
I'm good at everything.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
To be honest, I would say I've studied math a lot. Whether I'm good at it or not, I don't know.
And the next one is, can you really drive?
I really wish I could say yes, but no.
Aww. But yeah, I mean, where this question came from is also a bit messed up because it's essentially just assuming whoever they talk to, the inability or ability of the person. So yeah.
Yeah. But I can drive. I'm just not a good driver. It's just that, there's this stereotype about Asian women not being able to drive. I wish I could say I'm a fantastic driver, but no.
Yeah. But race has nothing to do with one's driving ability for sure.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No.
And next one is, are you from North Korea?
I get this question a lot. And then sometimes just to mess up with people, I say, yeah, I'm from North Korea. I escaped from North Korea. Because the chances of meeting a North Korean, not North Korea refugee, but North Korean is very rare.
Yeah, and finally, what is your real name?
Yes. Oh, this question, I get this a lot. Oh, I say, yeah, what do you want it to be? Yeah, this is my celebrity name.
That's a nice one. Well, thank you for playing this round of Rapid Fires, Lydia. And And now for us to wrap up the episode, I'm just wondering for our listeners who are curious to find out more about the research that you've done, where can they find the work? Where can they read up on the reports and the efforts by IKEA researching into the areas?
Yeah, if you just search Life at Home Report IKEA, that's where we have global reports. That's where you will find a lot of interesting studies that we do annually. And then just by simply checking our products, that is the ultimate result from research going into product development. So that's what you could do as well.
And a quick follow-up question. So for those who are actually interested in doing your line of work, how could they get started, really?
I think the starting point is just, being interested in people, like having this genuine curiosity and then really understanding what is the meaning behind it. So I think that's the really start of it. And I think I was lucky enough since I moved around a lot. It was always in my very nature, to understand people, what is the real meaning behind it and all of that just kind of I think I was fortunate enough to train that from a very young age, but really understanding people as they are.
Amazing, amazing. Multiculturalism and the understanding of it is definitely an asset. But finally, Lydia, here's a question to leave our audience with. What does it mean to be proudly Korean for you?
For me, that is remarkable resilience. It's about always bouncing back. I think also considering Korean history, we had a lot of tough times, but we always bounce back and feel proud. And having this kind of caring love that we have as a Korean, I think that's how I would phrase being proudly Korean.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Lydia. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It was fun.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.